back in business. So we have no videos for last time, which I'm sorry about. Hopefully we'll have videos for this time. Last time was a dry run. For this time, we went through exactly how the LM curve shifts and how we can sort of back out the shifts and counter shifts and stuff. We didn't really have anything that we learned from that, though. But we're going to learn something from doing the same thing with the IS curve today. So it was sort of a way of giving you two runs at the kind of logic, but the logic that counts is the logic today. So what do we have here? We've got our IS and LM curve, right? We've got, sorry, what we're going to be thinking about now is what happens. So we did monetary policy. What happens with monetary policy? Now we're going to do what happens with fiscal policy. So if we, for example, increase government spending. And this is also what happens if, for example, people get pessimistic about the future or optimistic about the future. If they get optimistic about the future, they start spending more because they think they're going to be rich in the future. And so autonomous consumption goes up. It's going to look just like government spending going up in this model. Right? So our exercise is we're going to have government spending going up. Right? That's what we're going to do. And we're going to be, we know that government spending, so the first thing you want to ask yourself, like as you're studying these things, let me calm down. Let me calm down. Like as you're studying these things, I know I've been telling you throughout to like look at this curve on a separate piece of paper and then look at that curve on a separate piece of paper. And up till now, you could kind of get away with not doing that. And a lot of people would be fine. Like I still think it's for everything, it's a good piece of advice. But up till now, if you sort of mushed it all together right from the very beginning, a lot of people would get through that just fine. But here at the ISLM model, it's really, really helpful to think of them separately, like to study where does the IS curve come from? What makes it shift? And then separately, where does the LM curve come from? What makes it shift? Because they're not just a simple story anymore. They're the whole equilibrium in the goods market or the whole equilibrium in the money market. And so really thinking of them separately and really understanding them before you put them together is crucial. Right? So take some time on that step, like do those two steps properly. And don't just jump to the ISLM graphs. Okay? In the end, we're just going to be working with the ISLM graphs. But if you don't understand what's going on in this curve, what's going on in that curve, I think you'll struggle. I think this is where it really comes into its own, thinking of them as separate entities. Okay, so we're going to look at government spending. And whenever we have these sorts of problems, and you'll see these sorts of problems on old exams and probably your exam, haven't written your exam yet, so I don't know what's on it, but very plausibly on your exam, questions about models tend to be of the nature, here's a model. Sometimes you're told what model to use. Sometimes you're supposed to infer what model to use. But here's a model. What happens if we change something? Right? And so the way you're supposed to think about that is these aren't reality. These are models. These are sort of descriptions of reality. And they work best if you start them at equilibrium. So what you'll do is you'll start at equilibrium, whatever equilibrium means in that model. And then this thing will change. In this case, we're changing government spending. Right? So government spending is going to go up. Everything's going along fine, and then government spending goes up. What is the implication of that? Okay? So how do you go about thinking about that? Well, typically, not always, but typically, you're going to have like several things going on in your model, because what the purpose of all these graphs is to take a bunch of interrelated things, think about them separately, and then put them together on a graph to see how they interrelate. Right? We have the goods market with the 45-degree line. We've got the money market, the financial markets with money supply, money demand. Two separate things. We're going to put them together and see how they interrelate. And that's going to be what our graphs are about. Right? So you're going to have several things going on. And your first step is to say, OK, have I identified what model this is that we're talking about? Here, very clearly, we're talking about the ISLM model because it's a lecture on the ISLM model, right? And so we're good there. And then our next step is to say, OK, this changed. Which part of this story does this affect directly? Right? Because we're talking about interrelated markets, that's why we do a model in the first place, it's always going to affect everything in the end. But where is the direct effect of this? Right? And here we've got two lines. We've got two lines. One of them represents the goods market, and one of them represents the financial markets. And so we have government buying more goods and services, right? And so the direct effect of that is going to be on the goods market, not on the money market. Everything's going to be affected in the end, but the direct effect is on the goods market. So it's going to be the IS curve that's going to be affected because that's our line representing the goods market. Before, when we changed the money supply, it was a similar thing. We started out in equilibrium. We changed the money supply. Say, well, in the end, everything's going to be affected. But what gets affected first, the financial markets or the goods markets? And the financial markets got affected directly. Change the money supply, we move down the money demand curve, interest rates change. And of course, the interest rates changes the goods market because people wanted to invest more, right? If the interest rate went lower. So everything was affected in the end, but the direct effect was on the money market. And so we knew that the LM curve, the curve representing the money market, was the one that was going to shift. Okay? So now we see we have something that's happening, told to us by God or whoever wrote the exam, right? Or just ourselves, like what would happen if the government increased spending, right? You think about that yourself, like on budget day. Well, if you increase government spending, that's going to directly affect the goods market and indirectly affect the financial markets. So directly affects the goods market, we're going to want to focus on the IS curve. Right? So I'm going to draw this thing in equilibrium, and I'm not going to put in the money market. It's there, of course, but I'm going to focus on the goods market. And so here's our IS curve, ISLM curve. We got Y here, we've got I here, got our IS curve, got our LM curve. This is the equilibrium level of Y, and this is the equilibrium level of I. Okay? Here we are in equilibrium. But I also, at this point, like when you're using this model, that's all you'll have to draw. But at this point, I want to bring in something else. We already know that the IS curve is going to shift to the right. You've probably forgotten that by now, but it's a thing. It's going to shift to the right. At any level of interest rate, now there's going to be more purchases of goods and services than there was before. Right? So it's going to shift to the right. But we also want to put in where the IS curve comes from. So I'm going to draw that up here. I want to draw it in equilibrium. So I've got our 45-degree line. This is Y, this is planned aggregate expenditure, and everything is in equilibrium, so it's coming out with the same level of Y. And so here we got our C plus I plus G plus net exports. And of course, I is a function of the interest rate, right? The higher the interest rate, the lower investment is. And of course, C is a function of income. The more income we have, that's why we have that upward sloping line. Okay? So there we are in long run equilibrium. Okay? Everything is good. Everything is going along fine. Everyone's happy or unhappy. Doesn't matter. They're in equilibrium. They don't get a say in it. So then this thing happens. That we have this change. The government increases spending. And so we wonder what's going to happen here. Right? So I will do this in what? I'll try blue. I'll try blue today. That's fun. Blue is fun. Government increases spending, so that's going to shift up our planned aggregate expenditure line. If I can get that continued out. I'm going to shift this line up like so. C plus I plus G prime plus net exports. Right. And if nothing else changed, if nothing changed, we would have what? Would have, this would be the new level of output. Let me call it Y tilde. So Y with a squiggle on top, because this is not going to be our final situation. Y tilde, bringing that down here. And so if we kept the same interest rate, if interest rate was the same as before, then we would have this level of output, Y tilde, right? Because we haven't changed the interest rate yet. We haven't had any interactions between the goods market and the money market yet. We're just doing the goods market. So this is what we've been saying before, right? Everything getting to Y tilde is what we said in the previous chapter, right? When we had the Keynesian model in and of itself. that you increase government spending, you get this new line, new planned aggregate expenditure, and output goes up. And it would go up in this case to y tilde. Okay? But if we look at that, well, that level of output at that interest rate, that's not equilibrium in the money market for sure, right? And so what's going on here is that sort of, there's no time in this, but it's kind of helpful to think in terms of effects, right? The sort of the initial effect is, okay, output would just go up, right? But as output goes up, people are becoming richer. The whole thing with output is income, it's expenditure, it's the same thing. So as expenditure goes up, government spending goes up, people's income goes up because they're earning money off the stuff the government bought. As their income goes up, they do what rich people do. One, spend more, which is incorporated in the top graph. But two, also in order to spend more, they need to have more money because money is the thing that makes spending easy, right? So on the money market, what's going on at this stage is, money supply, number of euros down here, interest rate here. I can, before it was in equilibrium here, L of I and Y. Money demand, right? But now Y is going up. People are becoming richer. And rich people want to hold more money. And so as this is happening, do this in green, the money demand curve at any given interest rate is shifting to the right as we get richer. Right? This is Y going up. Causes the money demand curve to shift to the right, which means there is upward pressure on the interest rate. So our new IS curve would go through this point. Right? If we kept the same interest rate, that would be the new place on our new IS curve. So our new IS curve looks like that. But that's not an equilibrium point, right? Because it's not equilibrium in the money market. So as this is happening, as output is going up, we're getting richer, we're demanding more money. There is no more money. The money supply is fixed by the central bank. And so people want more money. There's no more money out there. The price of money goes up. The interest rate goes up. As the interest rate goes up, we sort of, probably more likely we move along this, right? We move along this curve until we get to the new equilibrium point. This is our actual new level of Y prime. And so as that is happening, investment is going down a little bit. So this curve shifts back a little bit. Well, it shifts back until we're, what happened to that? It's gone. Ah, there it is. Okay. Happy days. Okay. It needs to cross right here. So that's going to be C plus our new investment plus our new government spending plus net exports. What the heck? So this whole thing fell. It goes back partially down. Okay. And this is crowding out. So what's going on is we got G goes up. In the goods market, that makes Y go up, which makes money demand goes up, and so the interest rate goes up. And so investment goes down. And this is called crowding out. And this is what we get like sort of the big punchline, if you wanted to say, why would we teach the ISLM model? First of all, as an educated person that's supposed to know some macroeconomics, you should know about it. Like it is a workhorse model. It's what everyone draws on the back of their napkins to figure out what's going on in the economy. They pretend like they don't, but they do. But also we get crowding out, and crowding out is really important. Right? Because we were saying before in this Keynesian model, well, we're in a recession, we should just increase government spending. Right? Because that we can get infinite production if we just increase government spending. Well, the infinite's still there. We haven't gotten rid of that yet. We will, but we haven't gotten rid of it yet. But now we see a downside. Right? The downside of increasing government spending in this way, yes, output goes up, but investment is going to fall. It's going to crowd out private investment. So by building the roads, that means there's less money going into building factories. Okay? Might be worth it, but it's a cost. Right? And so we should be aware that there's that cost. Now, if we're in a deep, deep recession, there's probably not much investment happening anyway. So it's fine. Right? But in good times, there probably is a lot of investment. And by spending more on government services, you get the services, and that can be good. It can be worth it. But you are giving up productivity in the future, because investment is where productivity goes up in the future. And so there's a real cost to that we only see when we put in the financial markets. Okay. Now, this is a mess. You can see it's a mess. You need to be able to know about crowding out, which is what we see here in a very sloppy way. But this is what's going on here. But if you were actually using the model, you wouldn't do any of this. So let me do this same thing the way I would actually do it, and what makes the model useful. Like if you had to go through all this, it's a bit goofy. I mean, it's a bit goofy in a couple of ways. It's a bit goofy. First of all, it's a lot of shifts, many things going on. The head spins, does it not? I believe it does. But also we have this curve shifts out, and then this curve shifts up, and then it shifts back. How do I know that it shifts back less than the amount that it shifts up? I don't really. Like I told you so, and everyone nodded along, or actually the eyes were saying, what the hell is going on here? But anyway, people didn't object. Hey, no one yelled at me, hey, Ivan, how come we know it doesn't come out all the way back farther? We know that mathematically. Graphically, you just have to sort of buy it. But we don't actually do that in real life. It's just illustrating there's a lot going on in here, right? There's a lot buried behind the scenes. But we don't actually need to go behind the scenes every time. So what I would do in real life doing this problem is I would say, oops, we're in ISLM model. Government spending goes up. What happens? And so I would say, okay, we're in the ISLM model. So we got Y, we got I, we got the IS curve, we got our LM curve. Here's our initial Y. Here's our initial interest rate. And I wouldn't draw any of those other curves, right? Those curves are what are going on behind the scene. But once we go through and we derive these things, we can just work exclusively in the IS and LM curves. We don't need to draw all those things. And if you were answering a question like this, I wouldn't expect you to draw all those things. Just knowing, you should be able to derive the IS curve. You should be able to derive the LM curve. You should know why the IS curve is shifting. But once you know that, you're good. We now know government spending goes up, right? So at the same interest rate, so we know, first of all, that this is government spending is directly affecting the goods market. So it's directly affecting the IS curve. It is not directly affecting the LM curve, which is the money market. So we might move along the LM curve, but we're not going to have a shift in the LM curve because the direct effect is on the goods market, which is represented by the IS curve. And then the indirect effect will be on the money market. Okay, so we have our IS curve, and we say, well, at this interest rate, before this is the amount of stuff that was going to be purchased, that was going to be sold. But now the government's buying some more stuff, so more will be sold than before. Because they got the same interest rate, and now the government's buying stuff too. And so our IS curve will shift to the right. At the same interest rate, we now have more. Right? But we won't get all that much more because that's not the equilibrium of the ISLM. We wouldn't be in equilibrium in the money market. So our new equilibrium will be here. That will be our new Y. And that will be our new I. So the interest rate will go up, and the amount of stuff produced in the economy, the income of this country, will go up. Right? Done. Clean, nice, one graph. Right? None of that other stuff that I had 4 graphs of. Right? We don't need that because we know where these lines come from. We don't need to do it every single time. Okay? And I said, well, where is crowding out? Well, I know that government spending went up, and we had 2 effects. We had Y went up, and we had I go up. But we know that when I goes up, investment goes down. Right? So we have crowding out. And I know that crowding out is coming because of, like, if the interest rate didn't go up, we would have this level of income. But in fact, we only have that level of income. Right? So income would have been here if it weren't for this Y prime without financial market. Because in our original model where we didn't have the financial market, interest rate was effectively staying the same. But now we're letting the interest rate change. And you can't see anything I just wrote. That's happy. Oh, good times to be alive. Yes, here we go. I don't know why it jumps 2 pages as well. It's very confusing to me. Okay. But it didn't go up that far, right? It went up less than that. And that less than is because investment is falling. The increased interest rate is driving down investment. Okay? Now, we don't know exactly how far because there's the whole multiplier thing going on behind the scenes as well. It's not that investment necessarily fell that far, but that was falling because investment was going down. Okay, so we have crowding out going on. People with me here? Okay. So this is how I would do a problem. I wouldn't even, like all the shifts and counter shifts and stuff. Not so important that you go through that. You do need to know enough about those graphs to derive these curves and to see where the shifts are coming from. But then you can just work directly in the ISLM. You don't have to draw the other ones. Okay? So this is what everyone draws on their napkins, pretending like they're using a more sophisticated model, but actually doing this. Okay? In fact, it's a simple model, gives the right answers. Like it always is a big word. It typically gives the answers that you would get from much more sophisticated, complicated 50 equation models that are used by the ECB and stuff. It gives the right answers. Okay? Of course, those guys are also concerned about how big these things are, how big these effects are, how much crowding out is going to happen. And then you need something more sophisticated. But knowing the general effect, this gives the right answers, by and large. Which is like shocking for a thing that, like, I think Keynes wrote his book in the late 30s, and nobody could make heads or tails of it. They said it was a work of genius, but it's so complicated. And then someone came along and condensed it all down to this ISLM model, and that's been like, our envelope thing to do since then. Okay. Questions about this? Okay. So to study for this, here's my recommendations. First, get a piece of paper. Derive your IS curve. Then think of what would make that IS curve shift. What would make it shift right? What would make it shift left? Convince yourself that it's shifting left and right, not up and down. Right? Then get out a separate piece of paper. Derive your LM curve. What would make it shift? What wouldn't make it shift? Why is it shifting up and down and not left and right? What's in the story that's making it do that? And then put them together and try doing the things I did, like increase government spending, increase the money supply, and then do the opposite, right? Do decreasing government spending, decreasing the money supply. Now, it sounds like it's the same thing, but like if it feels easy, it means it's sort of you've gotten it. But if you kind of know it, you will actually struggle with that, and that will be a sign. that you haven't quite gotten it yet. So it's worth doing that just to test yourself about that. And in particular, you want to see what happens to investment when government spending changes or when the money supply changes. You want to see what happens to output. You want to see what happens to investment. Okay. So just from the ISLM graph, you should be able to figure out, give you any change. You see how the curve shifts, see what the new equilibrium looks like, and you should be able to figure out what happens to investment when you do that. Now, in terms of getting out of a recession, suppose we want to get out of a recession. Which means we want Y to go up. How can we do that? Well, we have two basic tools, right? We got our monetary policy and we got our fiscal policy. And so let me just draw two different graphs. This is going to be money supply going up, and this is going to be G going up. This is two ways that we could get out of our recession using our two different tools. So what we got, Y, I over here. We got Y, I over here. So we start out, we got our IS, we got our LM. And if we increase the money supply is a feature of the money market, not the goods market, right? And so the direct effect is going to be on the financial markets. So the direct effect is going to be on the LM curve, not the IS curve. It's going to cause this curve to shift. And we have more money in the economy. So at the same level of Y that we had before, keeping Y the same, let's see, we have more money in the economy. And so people are going to find money cheap if you have more stuff in the economy, right? If you have more of anything, if you got more shoes, the price of shoes is going to go down. If you have more money, the price of money is going to go down. Interest rate is our price of money, is what you give up to hold liquid assets. So our LM curve is going to shift downward, like so. This is our new LM curve. And so we get, as we had hoped, that output goes up, but at the same time, interest rate goes down. So money supply goes up, we get output going up, and we get interest rate going down. Interest rate going down means that investment went up. The way that the financial market has an effect in our story on the goods market, on the real world, is that it changes the interest rate, which changes the cost of investment. So when the interest rate goes down, investment is cheaper, and so you get more investment, and that's why we have more output. The more output is coming because we're increasing investment. And so this is glorious. This is glorious, right? Because we've increased output and we're getting more productive in the future. We got it all. Life is good. Whereas if we do the same thing while increasing government spending, do that, we got our IS curve, we got our LM curve. We have government spending goes up. That's a feature of the goods market. That's the IS curve. And so the IS curve is going to shift. The LM curve, the financial markets, are not going to be directly affected. They're not going to shift. We're going to move along that curve. And so we increase government spending and increase government spending. So at the same interest rate, keeping the interest rate the same, of course, in the end it won't, but if we kept the interest rate the same, now people would want to buy more stuff than before because all the people were buying the same stuff they were before, plus the government's buying some stuff, right? And so our IS curve is going to shift to the right, like so. Which means output is going to go from here, good grief, up to here. Output goes up, and at the same time, the interest rate goes up. So we got G goes up, which implies output goes up, and interest rate goes up, which means investment goes down. God's sake. So this is bad, right? Because we don't want to sacrifice our future just to get out of the present predicament we're in. Okay. So it looks like, just from this ISLM thing, that like the way to go is to, if you're in a recession, to increase the money supply, right? Which is like another way to say like lower interest rates. This is how you'll see it talked about, like the U.S. president, what's his name? I'm sure we'll remember his name at one point. What's his name? The U.S. president is getting on the U.S. central bank's case, trying to fire people off because the interest rates are too high. Right? What he wants is this. He wants interest rates to go down, therefore investment goes up and output goes up. Right? This is what he wants. Okay? Well, why doesn't the central bank do it? It's all good. It's all good. Like, well, some things we haven't gotten to yet. And the particular important thing that we haven't gotten to yet is all of this is still short run. Right? This is all in this world where prices are fixed. Right? We haven't gotten out of that. And so in a world where prices are fixed, in our short run, this is the way to do it for sure. Right? Because you get output to go up and you get investment to go up. It's all glorious and great. Right? Real world is, of course, messier. And if you're printing loads of money, prices will eventually go up. Right? And so our nominal interest rate goes down. It's not clear that our real interest rate is going down. And plus, we're getting inflation. And inflation can be a bad thing, right? So we don't see the cost of this one, of increasing the money supply in this model because we have this short run thing. Now, our next model, which we're starting today, actually, doesn't have that. We're gonna bring this in. We're gonna bring in prices changing, and we're going to worry about that because, again, clearly ridiculous. But in this world, it's all good. Okay? Now, in the real world, there's two troubles with doing the monetary policy to get out of a recession. One, the inflation, right? And this is like the reason why we have inflation in the last few years, where it's been a trouble pretty much everywhere, is because of the pandemic. Right? We had the pandemic. And people were like, I don't know, they shut down half the world economy and the stuff that kept coming. Did you notice that? I think we can go on 3-day works, then it's 3-day work weeks, and it's gonna be fine. Like, nobody would work. Anyway, my rant about the 3-day work week aside, it was an economic slowdown, right? And so they wanted to try to keep the economy rolling. And one of the ways almost everyone did this was increasing the money supply, printing loads and lots and lots of money, right? Lots and lots of open market purchases. And of course, eventually the prices start changing. If you just increase the amount of money in the economy, eventually prices are going to go up. And so the years after the pandemic, we've been paying the price for the money supply going up before. That doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. But it does mean that there is a cost to be paid. Right? We don't see it in this model, though. Okay. And this one, and then that's one trouble, right? That we don't see the cost in the model, but the cost is real. And it's a cost in terms of inflation. The other trouble is that monetary policy is that long chain of events to make it happen. Government spending is direct. You buy more stuff was bought. Right? And so it's a very direct effect. There's very little that it can go wrong with it. It can take you a while to actually have the spending and all that kind of stuff. But it's very direct. If you can start spending or if you can lower people's taxes, it's going to directly or fairly directly affect output. Whereas for monetary policy to work, well, first of all, the interest rate has to go down. That has to be the interest rate that firms are actually paying. And then it also has to be not just the nominal interest rate, but the real interest rate that's going down. So prices can't be adjusting too quickly. And then firms have to actually respond to the lower cost of investment by actually investing. And then all this stuff happens. But of course, if you're in a recession, it's a little harder. Like you can say like the cost of investing is really cheap, but we're in a recession. No one's buying anything. So why am I going to build a factory if no one's going to buy my stuff? It doesn't matter how cheap you make it to borrow to buy a factory. If I can't sell the stuff, why have a factory? Right? And so there's a lot to go wrong in that chain of events. So particularly when you want monetary policy to work, this having your effect on output be through investment is problematic because it's just when people don't want to invest. Right? And so it can be, there's various arguments. People, like, it's a huge fight in macroeconomics. They're always going on and on about where in this chain it might break and is this a good idea in a recession? Isn't it a good idea? Like, huge debates, like huge, going on my entire career. Like this is the thing. But the other one is fairly direct, but it's very costly, right? You're increasing output today at the cost of output tomorrow because you're driving out private investment. Now, in a recession, that might be okay because there might not be any private investment out there anyway, or very little. And so that effect will be small. But as times are, if it's like a little bit of a recession, there's still a lot of private investment, you could be driving that out. Right? So there's debates about that as well. Okay. Right, so you guys should go through and do all of this stuff with government spending going down and with money supply going down. Okay. Sounds easy, is easy, but will be hard the first time you try to do it. It's like everything else, like riding a bike, right? It's hard the first time you do it, then it becomes easy. So give it a try so that it becomes easy before the exam rather than, you know the deal. Okay. And then we have like a whole bunch of canned graphs doing just this. I won't go through them. That's that. So questions about the ISLM model? Okay. So if you have books, like people have books. So the farther we go along, by the way, the more useful books might be. Like the stuff on the GDP accounting stuff, like if you get a book, like it's going to go on and on about lots of stuff we didn't cover. But as we've gotten to the model, like the Keynesian cross diagram, there's loads of resources for on the web and in all kinds of books. ISLM model, exactly the same way, loads and loads of resources. However, if you got some introductory book, it may or may not have ISLM in it. So take a look, like before the panic sets in, find out. Intermediate books, though, like some people put it in the introductory book, some people put it in the intermediate books. It just depends on how the book divided things up. Ours has it in the introductory book, but other like programs, other courses would have it moved to the intermediate book. So if it's not in your introductory book, you'll be able to find it in an intermediate book. It's the same stuff. It's just, labels and what they decide to put in a semester. You only can put in so much, so sometimes it gets put here, sometimes it gets put there. But you should be able to find resources on that. And like if you're having trouble, first of all, you can come to me, but also like take a look. Like there's loads of stuff out there on the ISLM model. So hopefully you'll be able to find something that helps you. But if you're not, like come talk to me and we'll do the thing. Okay. I want to save this before I screw it up. There we go. What's going on? Life is a mystery. Oh, I see. I don't see. Sorry. It's one of those abusive relationships where I love the computers and they hate me. We'll just force it to stop. Back in the day, you could take the battery out of your computer and show it who's boss, but nowadays, not so much. Nowadays, you start your computer and it says, welcome to your computer, like they own it. And anyway, old guy troubles, I know. Cheers. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Look at that. I'm so proud. I'm so proud. So what are we doing next? What are we doing next? So now we finally, I know I've foreshadowed this about 100,000 times at this stage, but did I open the wrong thing? I probably opened the wrong thing. No. Did I save it on top of something else? I probably did. There we go. Okay, so now we finally want to start talking about something more long run. So far up till now, we've always been in the short run, which was defined in this way that was like before anyone can change their prices. Now, obviously that's not ever literally true, but you can kind of think of it while most people haven't adjusted their prices. Like a little vague on that because the theory is simple and straightforward. Nobody changed their prices, but reality, of course, messier. But now we want to bring in some discussion about what happens after prices adjust. Right? So we're going to have a distinction now between the long run and the short run. Okay. So we're gonna derive the aggregate demand curve, and that's going to be downward sloping, just like the demand for shoes. And then we're going to derive the short run aggregate supply, and we're going to derive the long run aggregate supply, and then we're going to be able to talk about where inflation comes from and how inflation adjusts over time. Okay. So this is the first time where we're actually going to have an explanation for inflation and try to understand how that affects things in the economy. Okay. Because obviously, in our short run, when prices never adjusted, you couldn't have inflation because prices never adjust. But over time, clearly, like if we print loads of money, prices are going to change over time. And even if like government starts buying up loads of stuff with government spending, that's going to affect prices as well. Like if more people are buying things, the price of those things are likely to go up. And so we want to incorporate that and see where things end up. Okay. So we're going to have a demand and supply, and it's going to look initially very much like the supply and demand for shoes. But I should switch from shoes. I should switch to coffee. But it's actually going to be different. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here at the beginning talking about the aggregate demand curve. It is going to look and behave just like demand that you saw in micro. Those of you who had micro. I know not everyone had micro. It is absolutely fine if you didn't. You'll be fine. Just ignore the bits where I say just like before. You'll be good. In fact, people that had micro might be at a little bit of a disadvantage because it looks so much like what you had before. You will be tempted to think it's the same thing, but it is not. Aggregate demand and demand are different in an important way. So our demand curve, and when we did like the demand demand for coffee, say. Let me get this where I can get at it. I can spell coffee right. We had the quantity of coffee that people wanted to buy, the price of coffee. And we said if the price of coffee is very high, they're not going to buy very much coffee. But if the price of coffee is very low, they're going to buy more coffee. Because coffee is cheap. I get free drugs. So naturally, everyone's going to buy them. It's a known fact. So that's what we said. And then we had various things that shifted it and whatnot. Okay. So now I'm just going to talk about aggregate demand. And when we talk about aggregate demand, if I can get this to not be red, that would be helpful. We're going to have quantity, but our quantity is just going to be Y, the amount of stuff that people want to buy. Okay. And aggregate demand is just, C plus I plus G plus net exports. Right? Because we said consumption is how many Irish goods and services, consumption is how much do consumers want to buy. And then this is how much does firms want to buy, and how much does the government want to buy, and how much do foreigners want to buy. And we dealt with the stuff to get rid of the imports, right? So that was the same thing. So it's going to be exactly the same thing we had before. And that is why, like my sad, pathetic life, I have actually memorized C plus I plus G plus net export like some kind of pathetic loser, because it's everything, right? It's just adding up all the different stuff. It comes up everywhere. There's a new model. It's going to be the same C plus I plus G plus net exports that we had before, but now we're going to graph it in a different way. Okay, so we're same that it always was, but now we're going to graph it in a different way. And so before we had like income and planned aggregate expenditure. Here we're going to say, well, we're going to think of this in particular as the expenditure. Right? So there's the three parts of Y, or three ways of thinking about Y, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Three ways of thinking about Y. There's the expenditure, there's the income, and there's the stuff itself. Right? And here we're thinking about it as expenditure. And we're going to think that this is a function of prices, but instead of putting prices like we had with coffee, we are going to put inflation. Right? Here, be careful, those of you who had microeconomics. In microeconomics, the Greek letter pi means profits, but not the profits that you commerce students know about, but are weirdly defined profits. But it's profits. Here, in macroeconomics, by convention, the Greek letter pi means inflation. Right? So we got inflation there instead of prices like we had with coffee. And we're going to have a downward sloping curve, and that's going to be our aggregate demand. And it's going to feel and look and taste and smell just like demand did, but it is not the same. Okay. And what makes it not the same? Well, to see why it's not the same, we need to tell the story of coffee. I think the conquistadors got it. And well, not that story of coffee, but the story of the price of coffee. Right? When the price of coffee goes up, this is saying, the price is low, I want to buy a lot of coffee. But if the price goes up, I buy less coffee. Why do I do that? Well, I say, this coffee is really expensive. This is a bad habit, Ivan, anyway. Get your act together. This is no way to live your life. And now you're ruining your family with your coffee expense. And so I substitute towards something cheaper. Instead of drinking coffee, maybe I drink tea. And I substitute away from the expensive thing towards the cheaper thing. Right? And that was the basic reason why demand was downward sloping in microeconomics. That when things got expensive, you substituted away. And then we talked about elastic, inelastic demand, some things you can't substitute from. Right? If it's heroin, then it becomes like a vertical line. It doesn't matter how much it is, you just got to get your fix. And so it doesn't really respond to price. Whereas other things have really great substitutes. And if the price goes up even a little bit, you'll jump over to those other things. Okay? We had those whole stories, right? How good were the substitutes for the good that determined the slope of the demand? It was all based on if something gets expensive, you try to substitute towards the cheaper thing. Right? Fair enough, right? And some things were easy to substitute away from, and other things were harder to substitute away from, and that determined the slope. That was the whole story. It is tempting to think that because we put an A out of this, but it's just sort of the same thing. Okay, it's the inflation rate, but so what? then it's the same thing, but it's not, because we can't tell that story anymore, right? Because aggregate demand is the demand for all the goods and services. So we're saying the price of all the goods and services is going up. Well, what do I substitute towards? There's no like it's everything. Everything's more expensive. I'm screwed, right? There's no way for me to do it. And also it's a little weird because the price of all the goods and services is going up. That includes my labor, right? Because inflation is the price of everything going up. So not only does the price of housing go up, but my wages go up. So what do I care? Why am I buying less if the price of everything, including me, is going up? And I'm selling myself every day like some, anyway, I'll leave that aside. So you can see it's not the same story at all, right? Even though it looks the same, smells the same, tastes the same, not the same. By the way, those of you who have different books, some books put the price level here in terms of inflation, right? That's okay. Like when we were writing the book, which way shall we do it? I don't know. Like your stories change slightly, but it's fundamentally the same thing. We're doing the inflation version. Doesn't make a real big difference. So don't freak out if you see that. Like you're okay. Okay, but we're going to talk in terms of inflation. It makes a few of the graphs, I think, easier, but essentially the model is the same either way. So I can't tell the same story I have, right? So it looks the same, but it's not going to be the same. Okay, I'm going to let you go for 10 minutes. Everyone have a break, and then we'll talk about why aggregate demand is downward sloping. Okay, let's start again. Let the frolics begin. Yeah, here we are, frolicking with the aggregate demand curve. So that's going to be our aggregate demand curve. It's going to look like this. It's going to behave in a way very much like a demand curve. If you just remember that its aggregate demand is just equal to C plus I plus G plus net exports. Shifting it will be super easy, right? Government spending goes up, you want to buy more stuff. So at any given amount of inflation, you'll buy more stuff, it'll shift to the right. The same thing we've seen before, exactly the same formula. Before we were graphing it against, for example, income and seeing how C plus I plus G changed as your income changed. Now we're graphing it against inflation. We're going to see how it changes as inflation changes. But it's the same idea. We're just looking at it from a different point of view. And this is, again, coming from the fact that we have two-dimensional space here, where we all can graph some kind of measure of C plus I plus G against one other thing, because we're working in 2 dimensions. But of course, it depends on many, many things. And the thing we're emphasizing here, the thing we're investigating here is how it depends on inflation. Okay? Okay, so we need to explain why it has the shape it has, though. And we haven't done that yet. All I said is that it's not the same story that demand had, because demand was a substitution story. That doesn't work when it's all the stuff. There's nothing to substitute to because it's all the stuff. Okay. All right. So the book has a bunch of different reasons why aggregate demand might be downward sloping. So now we're investigating, why is it downward sloping? Why am I going to call it downward sloping? And the one that the book, because written by idiots, or in the book, it emphasizes the central bank reaction function. We are not doing the central bank reaction function. That was a fight that me, as a co-author, I lost. Everyone else wanted to do the central bank reaction function. I think it is not helpful when you're first learning this stuff. The reason it's in there is because that's how central banks actually think about the thing. And Ben Bernanke was the head, one of the co-authors was the head of the US Central Bank. And so he's got a little bit of clout, I'm just saying. And it's a reasonable thing. There's nothing wrong with it. The reason I don't want to talk about it is because it makes perfect sense once you buy the whole thing. And like if you were a central bank, that would be a reasonable way to think about things. But it is not helpful for learning about why the central bank behaves in that way, right? And that's what we want to do first, is learn about why the central bank behaves in that way. And then we can incorporate how they actually behave into a story. But until we know why they're behaving that way, why they might not behave in a different way, it just feels like a confusing way to learn it. So we're not covering that. We're not covering like tear it out. You remember, I don't know if you guys saw Dead Poet Society, but they like made them stand on the desk and tear out a certain portion of the book. That kind of thing. Just tear it out. Like it is not like don't look. Like honestly, don't look. It is something that will confuse you, not enlighten you. My personal opinion, Ben Bernanke. I'm just saying. Uncle Ben. But don't. Like you can later, but don't when you're first learning it. It's an added layer of confusion that you don't need. Okay, so other and indeed better reasons why we think that the aggregate demand curve is sloping downward. And I'm going to give you a number of them. You don't have to buy all of them, right? You don't have to agree. Like this is true with everything that you ever learn in university or anywhere else in life. You don't have to agree. Right? You have to know where the people that think this way are coming from. And you have to know why. And like if you have like good reasons why not, that's great, right? But you need to understand the argument for. Right? And for this, you need to convince yourself reasonably that you understand a reason that you can buy that the aggregate demand might be downward sloping. So if 2 or 3 of these you think are rubbish, that's absolutely fine. But learn where people who think this are coming from. Idiots, obviously, many idiots out there. But convince yourself that it's reasonable the aggregate demand is downward sloping, or not. Like you don't have to be convinced. Like you don't have to agree with any of these models. Right? And you will be standing with Nobel Prize winners if you just say this is all rubbish. If you say it's great, you'll also stand with Nobel Prize winners. So they're everywhere. You just can't get rid of them. Lousy with Nobel Prize winners. Anyway, a few reasons why aggregate demand might be downward sloping. Okay. So this is saying, well, if we have higher inflation, remember this isn't prices in our story, it's inflation. So when inflation is higher, that means if I hold my wealth in terms of money, if I hold my wealth in terms of liquid assets, it is losing value. So I am inclined to hold less liquid assets than I otherwise would because it's being eroded by inflation. So the higher inflation is, the less liquidity I have, which means spending becomes harder. And so I do less of it. With high inflation, I hold less money. Money is what makes purchases easy, and so therefore I make fewer purchases. I just get caught out, nothing in my bank account, it's all in my investment account. Screw it, I won't go out for pizza this week, right? Or, no, you can think about it from firm's point of view as well. Okay? If they don't have liquidity, they can't buy something on a whim. It's slower, more painful process to do it. Okay? People with me there? Questions about that? Again, this is coming from 2 things. One, money is the thing that makes spending easy. Right? It is the medium of exchange. It's possible maybe to buy something, do swaps and stuff without cash, without money, but it becomes harder. And so the higher inflation is, the less money you want to hold, the more you want. So back in the day, well, I guess it's happening again, but when I was living in Turkey back in late 90s, they had 100% inflation. And all the cabbies, you would take a cab somewhere, and you'd like, okay, it's going to be €3, the equivalent, obviously. €3, I got a €5 bill, and the cabbie wouldn't have change for you. And he'd go out to all the other, he'd stop, and he'd spend 10 minutes talking to cabbies. Can you make change for a 5? Can you make change for a 5? And you think, oh, they were poor people, it was huge. No, it was €5 to them too. Like life is life, right? Everyone's buying the same stuff, more or less. It was trivial money for them. Like less trivial than for us, but still, like it was not big money for them. But they just wouldn't have change for that. Why? Because if you're a cabbie, you're a relatively poor person, and to be able to make change for everyone, you kind of have to be carrying around $100 in small bills, right, all day. And that's $100 that you're just carrying every day. Starts out the day as small bills. Over the course of the day, it becomes big bills. You go to the bank, you switch it into small bills again. That's $100 you're just carrying. Well, with 100% inflation, that is worth half as much at the end of the year. And so that's a $50 cost to the cabbies every year. And they were relatively poor people. Like it's not that they couldn't have done it, but it was enough to matter to them in life. Right? And so they didn't hold the cash. Right? Then when inflation got caught under control, they started being able to make change for everything, right? Because you didn't get the value of that money didn't get eroded over the year. They hold $100 in cash, they lose $3 over the year. That's fine, right? Which meant that a lot of times you wouldn't take the cab. But you would say, okay, I could walk or I could take the cab. I'd rather take the cab, but there's going to be like a whole 10 minutes at the end where he tries to, and I don't even have any small bills. All I got is a 20. And it's going to be like a whole thing at the end. And by the time he gets changed for the 20, I could have just walked there anyway. And so you didn't, right? And so you bought less stuff because of this whole awkward thing at the end of the cab ride where they had to do the swaps to get change for your thing. I'd say with high inflation, the value of your money erodes, so you want to hold less of it. You don't want to hold your wealth in terms of liquid assets because it doesn't pay an interest return. And so it's being affected by inflation. Right? And because you have less money, transactions become harder. And so you don't do as many of them, right? On the margin. Another completely separate story about why aggregate demand might be downward sloping is, what is it? What is it? Inflation tends to redistribute wealth from poor people to richer people. Poor people spend a larger portion of their income, so inflation decreases spending. So there's two steps to this, right? There's inflation tends to redistribute wealth from poor people to rich people. Now, this isn't necessarily true. When you have high inflation, some rich people get hurt. Some poor people get helped. It just depends on where you are in society, right? If you have just, for example, let's suppose we were here and you just borrowed, everything's fine, there's low inflation, and you borrow money for a new car, you owe $20,000 and you got it at 5% interest. Right? And then all of a sudden, unexpected to everybody, there's a huge inflation. And so the prices of everything goes up. Well, you already borrowed the money for the car, you're paying 3% interest, and now all of a sudden, your wage is doubling over the year. Price of everything else is doubling as well. Wage is doubling. So the real cost of paying back that loan is quite small. That redistributed wealth away from the bank towards you because of that inflation. So if you're a borrower at a fixed interest rate and surprise inflation comes along, inflation is going to redistribute wealth towards you. And if you're a lender, it's going to redistribute wealth away from you. Right? If you're on a fixed income that's not adjusted for inflation, inflation is going to hurt you. If you're paying people on fixed incomes and inflation comes, it's going to redistribute wealth towards you. Okay? So it's going to have these redistribution effects. And some poor people are going to be helped, some rich people are going to be hurt. It's going to be a whole mess. But by and large, overall, poor people tend to be hurt more by inflation than rich people. And we can see this by an extreme example. Let's suppose you have 100 million euros. I know you have more, but suppose you only had 100 million euros and you're suffering through your days with only 100 million euros, and everybody realizes that high inflation is coming. And all your money's sitting there in the bank at the moment. And you say, okay, high inflation is coming. My 100 million euros is going to be worth less next year than it is now. Well, that sucks, right? I could be able to buy less. So what would you do? Well, you'd be like, God, let me go hire a team of money managers to figure out how to avoid the cost of this. And you get your team of 12 professional guys, all with MBAs, and they'd come in and they'd analyze your portfolio and they'd figure out clever ways that would avoid the inflation problem for you. And you'd be okay, right? Because they do the thing. Now, suppose that you have 100 euros. And you're also bummed out because it's going to erode because of the inflation. But you can't hire a team of money managers. In fact, you kind of don't even have the time to manage your own money because you got to eat, and you got to work, and right. And not only that, there's lots of things. Even if you're into it, right? There's lots of things you can do with 100 million euros that you can't do with 100 euros. So the options available to the rich are different from the options available to the poor. So overall, on average, the argument is that poor people get hurt by inflation more because they have less ability to avoid it. They have less options to avoid the cost of inflation, whereas rich people have more options to avoid it. Now, some rich people do get hurt by it. Like, it's not like universal, but overall. Okay? So we have this inflation. There's a certain amount of wealth that's created by the actual making of stuff. It's not the euros, but the actual stuff that gets made, goods and services that get made. And those are distributed around in the society. And so this inflation is going to, on average, take some of the wealth of the poor people that they otherwise would have gotten and transfer it to rich people. Very messy, not everybody, but on average. Okay? But the thing is, if you give Bill Gates 100 euros, it doesn't change his spending at all. It just goes into the big money bin and he swims around in it like Scrooge McDuck. And then, but if you give it to someone poor living under a bridge, they're going to spend all of it. Right? And so you're taking wealth away from people who are spending all of it and giving it to people who are spending a small fraction of it. And so the total spending goes down. So high inflation means total spending goes down, okay? Which is what we're looking for the demand downward sloping. High inflation, spending goes down. People with me here? Okay. Again, you don't have to buy it. Again, I can line up a whole bunch of famous economists that don't buy it. I can line up a whole bunch of famous economists that do. Right? Not everyone likes the aggregate supply aggregate demand model. I think it's great, but not everybody does. But that's one story that gets you off there. All right, here's another story, completely independent story. High inflation tends to be more variable, so there is more uncertainty. This leads to decreased spending. And this is not a feature of inflation itself. This is more an empirical regularity. So if you look at countries that have 2% inflation, that are running 2% inflation, one year it's 2%, next year it's 2.1%, next year it's 1.9%, and it varies kind of around 2%, right? If you look at countries that have 20% inflation, one year it's 20%, next year it's 25%, the next year it's 15%, jumping up and down by 5%. If you look at countries that have 100% inflation, one year it's 130%, next year it's 70%, jumping up and down by 30%, right? And so the variability tends to be much smaller in low inflation countries than it is in high inflation countries, okay? Now, this is something that's not well explained. Like in terms of our economic theory, how much do we know about that? Some people have worked on this. There's some stories, but it's not something that we're really settled. This is the story about why that is. But if you look around the world about high inflation environments and low inflation environments, this is the fact of life. Okay? It would be nice to know more about why, but we don't really have a full understanding of why, but it is how things seem to work. So if you're living in one of those environments, then you're living in a high inflation environment, you're also living in an environment where you're very uncertain what inflation is going to be next year. When I was living with 100% inflation, some years we were rich, like our pay got increased, expecting 100% inflation, it was only 70% inflation, and we were rich. In other years we were really poor because the pay only went up a little bit, but inflation went up a lot. It was very, like, here sometimes inflation's higher than others, and some years we're richer and some years we're poorer, but it's much more predictable. Lifestyle is going to be about the same. Back in the day when we're living in a high inflation country, it was much more variable. Like this year we can't afford to go on a trip. Next year we can go on 3 trips, right? It was that kind of thing. And so if you're living in a very uncertain environment where you're not sure what your real wage is going to be next year, you have to have savings so that in case things are rough next year, you can get through it. And so you tend to cut back on your spending so that you can deal with the uncertainty. Right? So you're living in an uncertain environment, you spend less just as a precautionary measure to have a cushion to deal with the uncertainties that are coming up. If you know exactly what you're going to earn next year and you know exactly what the prices are going to be next year, you're fine. Like you can plan ahead and you don't need to have a big safety net now because you know what's happening in the next year. But the more uncertain it becomes, the more you need to have a nest egg just in case things are bad. Right? That's another story for why aggregate demand is higher. Right? So the idea is if inflation is high, people are living in an uncertain environment, they cut back on their spending. So inflation high leads to less spending. Again, what we need for aggregate demand downward sloping. And lastly, If exchange rates don't adjust, our goods become expensive to foreigners, so they don't buy them. So this is getting into the whole exchange rate mess. And I say mess because if you wanted to make fun of economists, and I know you do, you could do like our funny behavior, of course, like there's plenty of things to make fun of. But one thing to make fun of is how little we understand exchange rates. Not in terms, we have loads of theories, but in terms of predicting what the exchange rate is going to be next year, we are terrible, terrible at that. So one, like you would expect, like if they printed a lot of money and the prices of everything in Ireland doubled, you would expect the exchange rate to the dollar to adjust the same amount. So that if it takes, like today, I suppose there's something that's sold in the US and something that's sold here. I don't know what it could be. What do they say? I don't know. You're buying something generic, You're buying some kind of, you're buying an apple, whatever. Not an Apple computer, but a physical apple. Or you're buying this stupid apple. And if it's €1 here today, and we're going to have inflation, it's going to be €2 next year. But of course, your wages will go up and it'll be €2 as well. So no problem. We just doubled all the prices of everything. Wages doubled, price of apples doubled, fine. Now you would naturally think that if the exchange rate at the beginning was €1 to $1 and the price of an apple is $1, then you would expect 1 to 1 and it would be the same price buying from the US as here. Suppose we start out that way. And then you would expect that if we doubled all our prices are now €2, but it stays being $1 for an apple, that the exchange rate would change so that when we gave them, that in order to get a dollar before we had to give them €1, now we'll have to give them €2. So the price of apples will double, the price of economists will double, the price of waitresses will double, the price of everything will double, the price of dollars will double as well, one would expect. That turns out to be in reality not true. So that's sort of our starting point for economists understanding exchange rates, and that is just categorically wrong. Like clearly, dramatically, pathetically wrong. Like if we want to guess, like suppose we know that there's 100% inflation in Ireland, and we want to guess what next year's exchange rate will be with the US dollar. Our best guess is honestly, like if you were empirically like trying to make money on the market, your best guess would be, it's not going to change at all. It's going to be what it is. Like the connection between reality and exchange rates is so weak. Now, if you look over a 10-year period and we keep having inflation, yes, eventually the exchange rate will catch up and eventually it will take €2 to buy $1. But that can be a huge delay, and it's huge research, like hugely important research, like about trying to figure out what makes the exchange rate so volatile and what makes it so hard to predict. But at the current state of knowledge, if you want to know what the exchange rate is next year, your best guess is that it's going to be what it is today, but you know you're going to be way off. It could go out down, it could be out, God only knows. Speculation is a big part of this, but in terms of practical, what is it going to be? We don't know. If you start looking at 5 years from now, like if I think there's going to be inflation continuously for the next 5 years, what is the exchange rate going to be? Yeah, you can start to have some predictive power. You can start to say, exchange rate's going to go up. It's going to start to take more euros to buy $1 over a 5-year horizon. But over a 1-year horizon, good luck to you. Like it really is something we don't fully understand. Right? We wish we did, but we don't. But what this means is that if our prices double, and we would expect it that to be double the price of dollars as well, so that the apple still costs the same buying in Europe or buying in the US, that's generally speaking not going to happen. We're going to have our prices are going to double. The exchange rate's going to stay the same. The price of apples in US stays at $1. So now our apples are twice as expensive as their apples. Right? Because ours cost €2, and I can take my €1, switch it for $1, and buy an American apple. And so naturally, we're going to be buying more and more American stuff. Because the cheapness, we like the cheapness. We're just weird that way, right? And so our consumption and investment, all of our purchases, will slowly start shifting more towards foreign stuff. So the amount of Irish stuff bought is going to go down. Okay. So this comes from an exchange rate not fully adjusting. So the idea is we have high inflation, our prices are going up, but the exchange rate doesn't change, so that is making our stuff expensive compared to their stuff. Right? So foreigners stop buying our stuff, that's the exports. We start buying their stuff, that's the imports. So exports minus imports, goes way down. And so the total amount that's purchased goes down. But we're still buying lots of stuff, but we're buying foreign stuff, not Irish stuff. Okay? And this is true, like not endlessly. This can't happen for 1,000 years, but it can happen for 2-3 years, no problem. Right? And does all the time. Like poor international economists crying over this for like the last 50 years. Like we cannot get a handle on what's going on with exchange rates. Loads, like it's not like they haven't made progress, but still, like you can't make a lot of money off what economists know about exchange rates. Now, a lot of you will probably go off and work in investment houses, and they may know a thing or two about exchange rates that we don't know, but they won't tell us because they're making money off it. So if you do a back channel thing, let me know what's really going on. I'd love to know. But we don't as a profession. And I think people have like forecasting models and stuff, but they don't really understand. Okay. Again, a lot of it's speculation. Just to be an aside about exchange rates, because it's important. We're not doing a lot about it in this class, but it is an important thing. When we tend to think about exchange rates, I keep telling stories like buying the Apple and stuff, and it's like the price of goods here versus the price of goods there. But if we look at the total volume that's happening on the market, like any given trading day, how much foreign exchange is being transferred here versus there, a tiny, tiny amount is for trade, and the vast majority of it is for financial shenanigans, right? And so people think the exchange rate's going to go up, so they move a whole bunch of money into zlotys or whatever, and so the huge movements, like 98, 99% of the currency movements are for these financial shenanigans, and a tiny amount is for the trade. And so the trade is constant, like we're buying the apples, and it's drip, 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 drip. But there's huge buckets of speculation. But over 10 years, the drip, drip, drip adds up. But on any given day, it's the sloshing around of the financial markets that are driving the price of foreign currency. So you need to understand all that stuff to understand understand exchange rates. But like if we're just talking about our goods market, and our goods market changes, the price of our stuff goes up because of inflation, that's part of the drip, drip, drip that'll show up as an effect in 5 years. It's not part of the daily sloshing around of money, right? And so for a while, 5 years, 10 years, we're going to have our goods are very expensive, foreign goods are really cheap. And so we're going to naturally buy more foreign goods, and they're going to buy less of our goods. And again, that gives you aggregate demand downward sloping. Well, that's our aggregate demand. Okay? One or more of those stories to get it downward sloping. Okay? Now, one thing to say about these models, is that when we draw a graph like this, we're saying that inflation matters for aggregate demand. C plus I plus G, the amount of stuff that people want to buy. It matters for that. But just because we draw the graph this way doesn't mean that it's the most important thing. It makes people feel like, the important thing for aggregate demand is inflation. Probably the important thing for aggregate demand is income, right? Like our other story is probably more about what people buy than, like, yourself, you go out and buy stuff. Like, inflation is way back in your mind if it ever entered your mind. It's more like how much money do I have in a month and what can I afford to buy, right? This is our daily life, right? And it's daily life for corporations as well. And so we're not saying that inflation is the most important thing or even super important for aggregate demand, but it is going to be the one that we're going to be focusing on here, it's going to be the one that has the effect that we're going to be looking at. So it's going to be important for our story, but it's not crucial that it's like the biggest thing that matters for aggregate demand. Okay, so, in fact, what would it look like if it didn't matter much? Well, this would be more vertical. Like it would be very close to vertical. Like whatever inflation you get, it doesn't change aggregate demand very much. So I draw it kind of downward sloping so we can see it. In reality, it's probably a little more close to vertical. Right? Not exactly vertical because of the stories that we had before, but inflation is a minor issue, particularly at the levels of inflation that we're used to. Right? You can tell from my stories that I go back to my days in high inflation Turkey to tell the story so that we can make, if I tell the same story, like remember like 2 years ago inflation was 3.1% and now it's down to 3% and how totally different your life is? You didn't notice, right? So the extreme examples tell the story better. But that's going to be our story. We just need it downward sloping. It's not important that it's sort of like really downward sloping like this. It can be fairly close to vertical, and this is still going to be a thing. Of course, it's easier to convey the graphs if we draw it with a real slope. Otherwise, you'll start thinking it's actually vertical, but we need it downward sloping for this story. Okay, how are we doing? So we are going to start, I think. Yeah, this is, we talked about this. This is anything that shifts C plus I plus G is going to shift this curve left and right, right? Because this curve is just our normal everyday aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G plus net exports, right? And it now is we're graphing it against inflation, but anything that changes C plus I plus G is going to change this. So in particular, government spending going up is going to shift this whole thing to the right. At the same level of inflation, before we wanted to buy this much stuff, now we want to buy more because the government's buying stuff as well. If we become optimistic about the future, autonomous consumption goes up. Again, that's going to shift our curve to the right. So if, for example, we increase the money supply, we have that whole rigmarole of everything that happens. Increase the money supply, interest rate goes down, therefore the real interest rate goes down, therefore investment goes up. It's going to shift to the curve to the right. Right, so all of our policies so far, all of our expansionary policies, and in particular, we have government spending going up or money supply going up, going to shift aggregate supply right. And of course, if any of these things go down, it's going to shift it to the left. Okay, this quizzical looks at me now. And I think where I lost people is with the money supply thing, right? Is that, no? People are so tired at the end of the week. Yeah, I understand. I'm trying to get a sense of whether I've lost you or whether you're just shell-shocked from a hard week at the end, the end of the term. Both are fair, but if I want to say more if you're lost and I want to move on if you're bored to tears, no indication. Hey, blink twice if you think I should do it again. What's that? Yes, I can. Yes, I can. And thank you. I appreciate the bravery. This is Y, and this is inflation. And we've got our aggregate demand, which is C plus I plus G plus net exports. Okay. So what's going on here is we've taken our C plus I plus G plus net exports, and we've graphed it against inflation. And so implicitly, when we're doing that, what we're saying is hold everything else in the world constant and just change inflation. What happens to the amount that people want to buy, right? And so a lot of things that we're holding constant are, for example, government spending we're holding constant, but we're also holding the money supply constant. We're holding all the stuff that affects the amount that people want to buy as constant. Now, we're not going to have a monetary model here, so all of that stuff is in there as well. So what happens if money supply goes up? Then the interest rate goes down, which means investment goes up. And we have that from the ISLM curve. So all of that ISLM stuff is actually buried in this aggregate demand curve. This is everything that directly affects, well, it fairly indirectly affects aggregate demand. In particular, we are going to, in a minute, well, not in a minute, but next week, we're going to be talking about supply. So the two, so here's where the confusion comes from. Finally, it comes to me. Now I know why it's confusing. I knew it was confusing. I didn't quite know why. Now I know why. So before, what we did is we broke the market into two bits. We said we have the goods market and the financial market. And we said, if something directly affects the goods market, it affects the IS curve. And if something directly affects the financial market, it affects the LM curve. And that, I don't know if you're okay with that, but I'm okay with that. And that's the important thing in the class. But now we're actually, and I haven't gone over this, so you didn't know, but I'm going to break the markets down differently. We're going to have the goods market, like the demand for goods, and then we're going to bring in firms as our other side of the market. And that's going to be the supply of goods. So we're going to have how many goods do people want to produce, which is new, right? Because before we had this metaphor where people were coming into the barber shop and they were just producing on demand. But now we're going to have more realistic firms where the firms are deciding how much to produce. Maybe they can't produce on demand. Maybe they have to produce it in the factory and then bring it to the shop and see who buys it. Right? So a more realistic story. So our two sides of the market are no longer the financial side and the demand and the production side. Our two sides of the market are the demand for stuff, how much stuff do people want to buy, and firms supplying stuff. And all of that stuff that we've done so far was demand stuff, right? Because it was all this metaphor. We have this barber shop. If people come in, if you buy it, they will produce it. Right? So everything we did before was affecting demand in one way or another. Right? Indirectly, convolutedly, but it all came down to this is how much it affects, how much people want to buy. So all of that stuff is going to be embedded in this aggregate demand because it's all stuff that affects demand. And so what we're adding here is two things. We're going to add a sense of time where prices can change, and we are going to add a more realistic, still not super realistic, but more realistic firms where they're deciding how much to produce. Okay, so our two sides of the market are no longer financial and goods. It's everything that determines how much people want to buy versus everything that determines how much firms want to sell. Okay. And so we've made a different distinction. And the fact that I didn't address that, we're making a different distinction is I think, where the confusion comes from. Okay. So our money supply, money demand, and that whole ISLM thing was all just determining in a convoluted, complicated way how much people wanted to buy, because that was our story about production. Production happened because people wanted to buy it. And if people didn't want to buy it, the production didn't happen. And so all of that is how much people want to buy. Okay. And so now, if we change anything from back then, from the previous chapters, anything from those previous chapters changes, it's going to be shifting aggregate demand because it's all stuff that's determining how much people want to buy. Okay. And so investment goes up. Investment, of course, is here. So investment goes up at any level of inflation. We now want to produce more. We want to buy more, sorry. And so aggregate demand goes up, shifts to the right. Okay, because all of that stuff is going into how many people walk into the barber shop. And that's what we're counting here. Okay. And now, but on Tuesday, we'll start talking about, well, a more realistic barbershop, right? Or maybe they have to produce stuff ahead of time. Maybe it's not a barbershop, but maybe it's, maybe it's a store where they have to stock the shelves and stuff like that. All right. I will leave it there, and I will see you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend. I know this time of the semester, nobody gets any sleep.